Welcome to Super Connected, with me, Tim Arnold, and my special guests. We invite you to join us in an intimate and honest exploration into the theme of connection. What it means to be connected to each other, what it means to be connected to ourselves, and what it means to connect in an ever-changing world. Named one of the world's 10 most influential intellectuals by MIT, Douglas Rushkoff is an author and documentarian who studies human autonomy in a digital age. And that's really at the heart of what this show is all about, trying to learn about. And it's what I want to learn about by having a chat with some of the people who have inspired me to think differently about the world. And Douglas is hugely influential to me in that respect. I watched him on a TED Talk about 3 years ago and began writing my next album as soon as the TED Talk finished. So this is a real treat for me to be able to return to the source of inspiration and talk in real time with the man who created Team Human. I'm in London, and he's in New York. If technology is upholding its side of the bargain, then we are now super connected. Douglas, thanks so much for joining me on the show. How the devil are you?
I'm all right. Thanks for having me in this strange moment of human history.
It is a strange moment. Contextualizing, we're both sort of on red alert because of coronavirus at the moment. How does that all feel in New York at the moment?
Oh, it's pretty desperate. I mean, partly because we've got kind of a worse public health infrastructure than most, so-called developed nations. So, what we're finding out is, when you do have, corporations gut your healthcare system and do everything with sort of maximum efficiency to the point where, there's only, a thin bandwidth of beds and services available for people. Yeah. We're looking at countries like, Italy and saying, oh gosh, if only we had a healthcare system as good as theirs, then, only 4 or 5% of our population would die. It's like, it's kind of funny or sad, but I don't know. The interesting thing about this moment is by the time people are listening to this podcast, or when they're re-listening to it 6 months or a year from now, they'll be saying, "Oh, look at that! That's before." They're talking before this thing happened, and look how okay they are. They don't really know, do they?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, in your work, which it revolves so much to do with the connections between the digital age and what we are organically as human beings, did you foresee something like coronavirus?
Well, yeah. I mean, what I guess any of us who've been watching, understand that we've been becoming increasingly brittle as a society, less and less resilient, that many of the painstakingly, evolved mechanisms that we have for social cohesion have been undermined, quite intentionally, either by the market or by technologies that we've developed to keep people in a light panic state all the time. Mm-hmm. If people are in a panic state, they're more likely to buy things. They're more easy to manipulate online. It's easier to get them to click on things. But a light panic state is not a good sort of background. No, it's not a good baseline.
When you say panic state, it makes me think of Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine.
Right.
And that whole culture that it still seems that a lot of people do not know what, obviously, you know about the shock doctrine, and I know because I was lucky enough to read it. It's one of the things that that frustrates me, I suppose, because I feel passionate about the kind of work that somebody like Naomi Klein does, the kind of work that you do, and I have that feeling of, I don't know, artists, singer-songwriters and bands in the 60s and the 70s were taking things they heard from writers and putting it in music, you know, because it would reach people. And now you kind of think that's not necessary because we have all these platforms that reach people, but there still seem to be a larger amount of people who don't know enough of the kind of stuff that you're talking about.
It's also, you know, even someone like me, even if I write, you know, 1,000-word essay on Medium or somewhere, my ideas mainly reach people when someone tweets a line, you know, from something I've written. And so we end up with these really kind of decontextualized memes flying back and forth. And the great reason, you know, to have artists and musicians, you know, writing songs and creating work around these ideas is with art, it's impossible to decontextualize the content, right? The content, the ideas end up married to the work. And, you know, that's essential right now. If these ideas are going to get, you know, to human beings in a usable, organic form.
Yeah. It's lovely to hear you say that. I have hope that more people in the music industry would say things like that. But then perhaps the music industry isn't the best platform for music or art anyway now.
No, sure. The music industry is in the same panic as everybody else. I mean, and it's interesting. And even the word industry, I mean, that's the thing that's going away.
Yeah.
You know, we're moving from an industrial age into something else. And whenever we're looking for industry to solve a problem, we end up back in the same problematic space.
It certainly feels like we're all in a great period of transition. Is that something that you consciously think about every day of your life? Because I know with Team Human, your podcast, your blog, the writing, the public engagements, it's full on. It is your life. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I mean, we're undergoing the biggest transition in human civilization since the invention of text. You know, we are going to be operating not just our society, but we're operating our minds, our consciousness, and our souls in a digital media environment. So we're really transitioning from, you know, the television media environment to a digital one, and they're fundamentally different. You know, and the brain operates differently. The child who's raised in a digital medium, you know, thinks and acts differently. And, you know, many of the things, you know, and it's hard for people like us who maybe were raised on analog music and continuous sound and all to think about, you know, what is it for a child to be raised listening to MP3s, to be listening to music where there's actually more silence than there is sound. You know, there is, you know, I mean, however much you sample, there's more blank space. So it's like living in rooms with only fluorescent lighting that's just flickering all the time. Now, for you and me, we could say that's just worse, right? Because certainly for our nervous systems that were raised in something closer to biological analog sounds and sights, it's definitely worse. We get decalibrated. Yeah. You know, and I'm interested to see what is a human being that has been calibrated to digital, and what will they be like, and will they be able to function, and what's going to happen, and especially when they're calibrating themselves to digital technology that has been specifically, consciously engineered to create panic states, to prevent them from thinking or expressing their autonomy.
Yeah, I mean, just staying with the music and sound side the evolution that we've seen, probably in the last 20 years more than at any other time. Sort of, does it feel like to you that there's been a war between sound and image? I mean, obviously, as a musician, sound is, that's my god. What the sound of things, but if you look closely at the social media platforms that we use to communicate with each other, it's very rare to find a way to tweet or post a sound unless it has an image or a video that goes with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, some of that's just how the platforms were developed. But yeah, I mean, computers are a visual medium. They're screens. I mean, people for most of the time were sitting in silence looking at pictures, and it is different. I mean, that transition sort of happened when we moved from radio to television, and we moved from that sort of hot emotional medium,
part of a longer evolution,
of radio and sound, to the cool medium of TV, where we became more visual. And I mean, I agree. Certainly, music and everything, it's all seems to be so organized visually. I'll be interested to see as we transition from screens to Siri and Alexa and all those things. And I'm sorry if I just activated anybody's listening device.
That happens with my mum whenever I'm on the phone to her and I mention the name Alexa. Yeah. She's more used to
Alexa, monitor now. Yeah. They're all going off. But so that could change things in some ways. But yeah, I agree. For the most part, we've moved into we're much more biased towards visual right now, and that has different social effects.
Yeah, and I'm aware that you are somebody that's been interested in consciousness exploration in your life, and it's something that you've written about. And in terms of sound, obviously the idea of closing our eyes, not having a visual, and hearing, and finding what journeys that can take us on, whether it's music or just sound, is something still I find so unexplored digitally.
Yes and no. I mean,
tell me, because this is.
I mean, there are.
I'd love to know.
There are people. I mean, certainly we as music sorts of people, or people who think about media and the body. I mean, we understand that sound, resonates in a whole body the way that sight doesn't. That sight, for the most part, certainly recorded, visual imagery and all. It stays kind of outside your body. It may be, if it's really bright, you may kind of feel it in the back of your optic nerve or something. But it's not like music. I mean, well, sure, music and ear pods in your ears is that's just something, or an MP3 is a, nice, whatever. It's a metaphor. It's a symbol system imitating sound or convincing your ears that you're listening to music. But real music affects your body. It's moving the air and the space. You have, there's cells in your bones that are designed to hear vibration and to be able to tell, when there's an animal behind a tree that's going to jump out at you, or that's how
this
you know
the stuff
when things
that's
are
attached to the limbic kind of memory, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So sound is in your body. Sound is so much more intimate. It's when even if you make a recording and it's playing through somebody's old JBL speakers and they're in the room, your music is moving their body. It's not just because they're dancing. It's moving it's impacting them on a physical level. So it's much more kind of organismic in its impact. And text isn't that way. And visual things tend to elicit much more of a critical response. You're looking at something and evaluating it rather than being enveloped by it. So sound is so intimate. That's why I do a podcast and not a vlog. You know, once people are looking, they're looking at me.
That's why I'm doing a radio show and not a vlog.
Right. Exactly. Not just because we're ugly, which maybe we are. You know, and that's such a judgment.
I just think if
we're only ugly to ourselves, but and to some others, I guess.
If you sign up to listen to something though, and then it means that you have an appreciation of the medium of just closing your eyes and letting stuff unfold into your imagination via your ears. I think that's
right. Or you sit and do the dishes and clean the house while it's coming through the speakers, but it's much more like we're in their space with them as opposed to being in the tube, you know, in the corner over there. You know, when you're it's really interesting. If you just turn the picture off on your television set while you're listening to the news or something, it's very different because now it's spatial rather than locked away.
It's funny in other conversations I've had on the same subject, and not just about music, but about everything that's coming through technical devices. It's always talked about how little space there is. You've mentioned the words, the sound and the space, like a half a dozen times since we've been talking. And is it across the board that part of the digital revolution is it's so oversaturated with stuff that the space is the bit that we're missing? Yeah,
I mean, what happened, to make a really long story short, is, Western colonial empires ran out of physical territory to take over. We ran out of countries and little, brown people to enslave. They started pushing back. So in order for these Western economies to expand, they needed to find new territory. And the territory they found was human attention. Was us. So we're colonizing human time. I wrote a whole book about it called Present Shock, about the attack on our temporal reality. But so they use every minute of our day to keep us engaged in the market in one way or another. Even if we don't have any more money, at least we're engaged giving our data to a market researcher who can then monetize that.
That is the monetization, isn't it? Is the data. I mean,
short term anyway.
I might know the answer to some of the questions because I'm very familiar with your work, but I'm going to ask them anyway because some people listening might not be, and I really want them to hear it from the horse's mouth. This obviously can't go on forever. This kind of crazy capitalist drive for people's data and control of our lives and our attention and our eyeballs. Where do you think this goes?
What's interesting, it was going to break in one of two ways. Either the data itself becomes worthless. There's as people run out of money and all they've got to give is data, their data's not worth anything because why do you want a poor person's data? What are you really going to get out of it? Maybe their vote? If that, but you could suppress their vote anyway. I mean, it doesn't really, or just use propaganda and keep them stupid. So what's the point of having data if people don't have money? The total advertising and marketing budgets of all the advertising agencies and all the market research firms combined has never reached more than about 3 or 4% of GDP. And that's throughout history. It stays somewhere between 2 and 4% back and forth since the beginning of marketing in the 1300s. That's just what it is. And so now we're looking at trying to sustain like the whole NASDAQ stock exchange and Google and Facebook and Amazon, everybody, well, not Amazon so much, but Facebook and Twitter and all these giant firms which don't make money except for their data, and think, well, wait a minute, how is data going to be worth 20, 30, 40% of the global economy? It can't. So I feel like we're in a data bubble that will break of its own accord. But then from the other side, it could break too, which is the only reason we have to grow the economy and have these companies grow exponentially is to feed this global banking system that's been really running the economy for the last 400 or 500 years. We might be seeing the end of that, this rise of nationalism, this
do you think it's their last? Is it a last hurrah for the kind of groups of people who believe in those ideologies? Is that what it is? Because they kind of know it's coming to an end, so the grip is getting tighter?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if they got their last hurrah. I mean, I think their last hurrah would have been, Hillary Clinton, winning, and, neoliberalism, this sort of global cooperative neoliberalism to continue. But that was all part of the television era, which was all about one big globe and seeing the Earth from space and the World Trade Organization and all. And that's given way to something else, not the right thing. I mean, the right thing would be localism. The right thing would be what we were arguing for, back in the early rave movement in the late 80s and early 90s, protesting against the WTO and wanting to restore local economic activity and peer-to-peer and trade and favors and doing things for each other. Instead of that, we seem to be reverting to this nationalist thing, and national economies and all, which I don't think will end up doing much better than the global economy did.
No, and it's isolationist as well, isn't it?
Yeah. It's isolationist. Rather, it's not about, why don't you connect with the people in your neighborhood? It's not about that. It's it's about, let's build a wall between us and Mexico or us and Europe. Yeah. It's about creating boundary conditions. And that's not the way to think about it. It's like, if you want to connect with your family, do you build a wall around your house, or do you encourage your kids to play with you? It's like
it feels recent to me, but it's not really that recent, is it? It's probably the last 2 decades. It's been moving all the time towards what we've seen with Trump and Brexit. Do you fear for people, children, I guess, just growing up in this atmosphere? What do you think it's like for younger generations to not know what we know? Because perhaps, I feel like I'm on the cusp of 2 very, very different worlds.
Well, I mean, I fear for them less than I'm grateful for what we got.
Yeah.
What they're going to live through is what most human beings have lived through since there's been human beings. Your grandparents, or parents even, certainly your grandparents were, sitting in the basements of London while, getting bombed by Hitler. My grandparents were, one set was running from the Cossacks and the Tsar in Western Russia, and the other half was, escaping concentration camps in World War II. So, we had a brief respite sort of from the end of World War II to the, end of the first Gulf War, I guess. Those of us in these places where the biggest wars that you knew of were the Falklands and that I knew of was Grenada, but this, if anything, this is more normal, with, yes, there's plagues, yes, there's wars, yes, there's economic downturns. The only difference is we got so complacent about being consumers that we let the communal fabric of our society erode. So now that we're moving into harder times, we don't have the kind of the social mechanisms to turn to one another for mutual aid. Instead, we're, stockpiling toilet paper, and not, and social distancing.
Yeah. I mean, I've always looked up to the 60s. My mother was a young woman in the 60s and was, sort of involved in a pop culture of change, real social change. So I've grown up with that slight kind of envy of finding it harder to see how we might engineer something now that colourful or that creative and that progressive. And it's not to say the individuals don't exist, because there's lots of individuals, you are one of them, who are making great changes. But it doesn't feel like it's reaching everybody You know, in the 60s, it just took everybody over. It didn't matter kind of what class you were part of. It seemed to affect everyone. And indeed, there were a lot of people who had not been afforded opportunity in education that were suddenly getting opportunities in theatre, you know, people from working class backgrounds, all those amazing changes. And now it seems much more divided, and a lot of intellectual, learned people are talking to each other and trying to affect change, but it's somehow not reaching everybody that would really benefit. Do you agree?
Yeah, and I think partly it's because the whole modality of revolutionary change is divisive, you know, and it feels very 20th century to me. You know, all of the isms, and, you know, it was great for, say, the civil rights movement to have a hero like Martin Luther King, and we'll rally behind him and march with our eyes on the prize and an ends justifies the means journey to liberation or equality. And that's not what we need now. It's not another movement and not another figure, if you will, you know, not another image on the TV set to believe in and march for, but something very different. Something, I mean, I use a big word like Renaissance to describe it, but really all I mean is a retrieval of values, and something that's scaled much more locally, much more scaled to the level of our bodies than the level of our markets.
Yes, and it is to do with the sort of the local approach to stuff, isn't it? It's not about looking to one great leader who will lead us out of.
No, I mean, think about it this way, you know, in terms of music, say, you know, there's this, you might be following a band, like you're from a place like Brighton or Manchester, and there's a local band, and you really like them, and you're really excited as they move up, and they can start to play at sort of larger venues where you are. Maybe they toured around the country a bit and came back, and then you welcome them back to the, you know, 500 to 800 person venue now. It's like, wow. Yeah. But then when they get to the next level, you kind of, now they're a big international sensation, and maybe you can get to see them at a friggin' arena or stadium, and maybe, you know, and you try to make sure that other people in the arena know, well, I'm really from Manchester, and I saw them in a 12-person club originally, and I used to know the guy, well, not this drummer, but the drummer before this drummer was like a good friend of my girlfriend, and
that is very 20th century.
But you know what I mean? But you kind of resent them. And now I'm thinking, you know, on a certain level, if we can pull it off, could you imagine getting to have local bands that get to stay local bands, that actually are your band and are your friends? You know, my daughter said something to me after we went. We saw Les Miserables on Broadway, this Broadway revival of Les Mis. And this was after she had seen it done by the kids in our high school. You know, she's in like elementary school at the time. And we were coming back from Les Mis on Broadway, and she's like, gosh, you know, I like the one that we did so much better. And I was like, well, why? And she said, well, because I knew who the people were. So it's so much more interesting to see someone you know playing this part, so that you can think about the difference between the part and who they are. Absolutely. When I'm watching it on Broadway, I have no way of knowing who they really are, so I don't know what they're acting, you know. And it was like, wow, isn't that interesting? So it's like the longing, and I'm hoping this is a sensibility that people of her generation share, that there's this longing for, how do we do it? I want to see, in other words, I don't want to see an anonymous person in a play or a movie. I want to see someone I know.
How old was she when she said that?
I don't know, 11 maybe.
Wow. I mean, I think out of the mouth of babes, because there's an element of, I don't know, the rock star, which I think that's over. The icon in general, an icon, I think is a very last century idea. And what you were just talking about that your daughter said, it reminds me a bit of how I accidentally, I mean, I grew up wanting to be a rock star, and I did the things that would be associated with that at a very young age, with the record company and all that stuff. And then it was all gone within 5 minutes, you know. and I carried on making music, and it was only probably 5 or 6 years ago I realized I'm not trying to do that anymore. I'm finding out that doing what I'm doing with lots and lots of different people to collaborate and share the ideas with and really share it. Like, this is ours, it's not me anymore. You know? That kind of thing is what I love doing now. And it's and I can sort of see that reflected online a little bit, whereby, you know, with streaming platforms like Spotify, all the rest of it, we have a lot of problems with those as artists because we don't know how to make money. But it is leveling out all the artists a little bit. It's leveling them out.
I don't know if it's leveling or not. I mean, you know, the long tail is not working. There's a very short.
Well, it's still working for the corporations.
Yeah, there you go.
But the
and
corporations,
it's working for three.
Yeah,
and Taylor Swift and 3 other people, and then 10 million who make who sell one record each.
But they're all they're in business together, and then the other 95% of us are not in business together. But perhaps we could be.
Yeah, and it's so funny when you were talking. I flashed back on. I just remember when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
You know, we used to listen to like WABC. It was, you know, like a top 40 station in the 60s, and when something would come on, I mean, this is when I must have been 4, 5, 6 years old. I thought that the bands went like to the radio station and played the song.
Played all the songs.
And then it's like, if you like, we'd listen to a song like Aquarius was a big hit, The Fifth Dimension did Aquarius. Yeah. And we'd listen to it on there. And then my dad might, you know, driving in the car, he might change the radio dial to another station. And there would be Aquarius. And I would think, wow, they must have just packed up all their stuff into a van and zoomed over to the other radio station. Yeah. Got it. How do they get it out so fast? Or do they have like instruments set up and ready and they just play them? And I remember trying to work that out in my head, not realizing that they're just playing records in there.
That's a great little peek into your imagination there, Douglas. I love that. Something I think when I first found out about your work, there was an excitement I had in the same way that I had about music, because it's not music, it's information that you're sharing a lot of, but passionately.
Well, it is and it's not. You know, it's stealth. You know, most books could be information like a dictionary or a thesaurus, but I really see my books more as sigils, as programs, you know, that if you...
I know a few other people who'd agree that they're like sigils, yeah.
But they're meant like that, meant to be, you know, so that you download... I mean, a book like Team Human is meant to restore, you know, your social immune system, you know, your cognition.
And optimism as well.
Yeah, and optimism. I mean, it's meant as a dose in you know... I mean, figuratively, but intentionally. It's meant to dose you with a way of thinking. You're downloading a program into your, you know, mental hardware to hopefully deliver some resilience and give you some shielding from, you know, the intentional chaos being foisted on you.
I think more than anything, certainly in Team Human, that made me not want to stop listening, and I did the audiobook, and it would be truth. I just found there's a lot of truth in it in a way that we all find hard to find now. There's a sense of, you love theatre. You said, you know, theatre is a really important part of your life, right? And that's, you know, it's one of the greatest art forms in the history of the planet, to be able to platform truth like no other. But now people, you know, on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, or whatever, you know, there's a lot more people using that than are going to theatres. Do you think you know, like the band is going to get back together again? Is truth going to make a comeback?
Truth will always makes a comeback because it's true, you know? And I mean, the beautiful thing about economies,
I mean, in context of the confusion that people have now, where they don't know what to believe, so they just shut down sometimes.
Right, but they shut down from, you know, from these figures on the screen. You know, when they realized none of these people are telling the truth. You know, I mean, I don't know. Maybe BBC, maybe they're still being normal or real or something.
There's a lot of conflict over whether or not the BBC. I think it's too large an organisation to generalise. Actually, some people say, "Oh, we don't like the BBC." And there's some departments of the BBC which are absolutely incredible and deliver beautiful work and beautiful information. They're still doing what they've always done, and then there's other parts of it which seem to be owned by corporations again, other corporations, I think.
Right. Because, I mean, I've been trying to watch the news in the U.S., and the odd thing is that the kind of more progressive or lefty stations that I was watching, like, you know, CNN or MSNBC, or, you know, a lot of people would call them centrist, I could see what they were doing when they were trying to, say, prevent Bernie Sanders from winning the Democratic primaries. You know, the misinformation and the negative framing of things. And the problem is it lowered their credibility for me. Or I would see the way they would take 5 seconds out of a Donald Trump speech and mischaracterize it in order to say, oh, Trump is comparing himself to Jesus Christ. You know, there was this one moment where he was talking about Middle East peace, and he said, oh, well, you know, no one else has done it, so I guess I'm the chosen one here.
Yeah.
And, you know, yeah, maybe it wasn't the best use of words, but they framed it for like 2 days. Trump has declared himself the Messiah. Trump says God has chosen him to lead. And it's like, he didn't do that. You're mischaracterizing it. So now when they talk about coronavirus and what it is and what it's not and what Trump's saying and what's not true, I don't have a sense of trust in them. And that's really dangerous when you can no longer trust your news media. And it's not just because Trump said, you know, the journalists are the enemies of the people. It's because they've undermined their own credibility by reaching for the most sensationalist, if untrue things they could say.
And that is being driven again by
money,
success, recognition, all these qualities which are something that are completely the opposite to the local kind of feel that you celebrate, I suppose, in your writing. There's people coming together with each other in real time, in front of each other.
Yeah, and that activates all sorts of mechanisms that have been dormant, you know, that don't get activated watching TV or tweeting with people. You know, quite the opposite. Twitter and Instagram and these platforms have been consciously designed to prevent those mechanisms from activating.
Yeah.
That's what they're for, to prevent that. That's what the captology department at Stanford University does. That's what they're being taught.
Yeah.
This is not conspiracy theory. This is what they've learned. This is the actual spoken, written, factual intent of these platforms. And then we wonder, you know, why we're all feeling this way.
I remember about maybe it's 2.5 years ago now. I can't remember, maybe 2 years, when the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke. It was Chris Wiley and Carol Cadwalladr, which I'm sure you know about. And it was really clear to me when they talked about it that, you know, in the old days, a politician would stand up like on a pedestal in the local square or whatever and say stuff to people to try to get their vote, and you'd all be watching that person at the same time and make your decision on whether or not you're going to give them their vote. And then they described it how it works on Facebook, and it's basically one politician managing to duplicate themselves into millions of different people who can each individually whisper into a different person's ear something slightly different, so that they're appealing to their personal tastes and prejudice and everything else. It's this really insane way of getting a vote or getting a Brexit or getting a Trump. And yet I remember saying it on social media a couple of years ago, and you could just see nobody just really thought of anything about it. It was just like, yeah, whatever, Tim, you know. And I just sort of sat back and watched all these things happen that people. I even remember voting. I voted Remain. I grew up living all over Europe, and I just, I liked the idea of staying in Europe, and everybody just thought that's never going to happen. We're not going to be leaving Europe. And it did. And I think it is to do with data management, isn't it? Those kind of decisions.
Yeah, it's partly to do with data management and partly to do with the fact that people felt numb, that people are aware that these systems are working against them. And this sense of this loss of control. I feel like the same impulse to vote for Trump or to vote for, Brexit is part of what was driving us in the WTO protests of the 1990s. This sense that there's a global economy that's working against us and people making choices against our best interests without our democratic participation. And it's a sort of a sense of revolt of like, well, how do we fight back? How do we withdraw from this awful thing? I mean, and no, it's not the most these aren't the most intelligent ways to restore a sense of local autonomy, but I understand the impulse, and the impulse is not wrong.
I mean, we started this show talking about music, and so it's nice to come back to it. We all know that music affects us, and we don't necessarily have to know why. But in terms of that great period, the 60s and the 70s, I think, for me, are so important. And with poets like Dylan and Lennon and Joni Mitchell, Leonard Cohen, traveling with music as a vehicle. And now, of course, it's very different. But I still feel that it's doing something. What is music doing now, do you think?
I mean, I think music does different things at different times. It does so many terrific things. I think right now what music's doing is helping us recalibrate, our digital experiences. If after you've been on, you go on your computer or your phone and go on Twitter for 20 minutes, and you will be necessarily decalibrated, right? You'll be made uneasy. Your nervous system becomes decalibrated, off balance. And you can recalibrate your nervous system by looking into somebody's eyes and just breathing a few breaths, by spooning with somebody or making love or playing ball with a child, or listening to music, because your body, that's the way your body learned to calibrate. You'd stand in the woods and your body and ears would listen to the sounds and the wind and the birds and the creaking of the trees. And that's how your system, your organism orients.
That's how we
to
were
the world around you
for sound, isn't
and
it?
Any great music, I mean, we listen to different kinds because our bodies are tuned differently. But when you listen to music, especially if it's music that you recognize, you can recalibrate your system the same way you retune a piece of technology to a test pattern.
Yeah, it's funny. You skipped past that very quickly, but I want to just paraphrase you. So we listen to different music because we're tuned differently. I think that's really beautiful. You meant with a lot of us. You meant that a lot of us have different tastes in music because our bodies are literally tuned differently. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, and what did your mommy play for you when you were a baby?
Yeah.
What were the sounds? How did it? I mean, my mom was playing Chubby Checker, the twist, and I Want to Hold Your Hand, and so those are the sounds. I mean,
I'm just funny you say that. I remember now the first time I kicked as a baby in my mother's stomach was at a showing in the theatre of the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Oh my God!
I don't know what that
you were
says.
doing the time warp in there. Yeah.
I think I still am. Douglas, thank you so much for this. It's great. It's like listening to you, but I can cheekily ask you questions as you go. I wish you luck with the rest of your work, and I hope we get to see each other in person at some point. It's been a real pleasure.
We'll see if people are traveling across the Atlantic again.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Because I'm not going to take a ship. I'll tell you that much.
No. No, nobody wants to be trapped in one of those. But yeah, really appreciate it. And
Thank you. And I appreciate you. I mean, gosh, thanks for continuing to make music against all odds. Because we need it now more than ever.
I think so. Douglas Rushkoff, you have been super connected. Thank you.
Thank you.